Gaven Morris has been the head of ABC News for a little over 2 years now. He has worked all around the world in his career, places like CNN, Al Jazeera, but we like to think we here in Melbourne created Gaven Morris because many of you may not know that Gaven was the 1996 Melbourne Press Club Young Journalist of the Year. And I've dated him appallingly having said that. And from that launching pad, he has built a tremendous career. Now running ABC News, and 80% of Australians do, and apologies if this sounds like a house ad, but it is, 80% of Australians do see the ABC as their trusted source of news and information, and he is trying every day, as we all are at the ABC, to provide distinctive, impactful journalism, and there's no better example than than the Four Corners piece we all saw, that disturbing Four Corners piece we all saw on Monday night about Saxon, and Louise Milligan, the reporter behind that, is here in the audience as well. A fantastic report, Lou, and that's what Saxon Mullins went through, nobody needs to go through, and the fact that the New South Wales government has leapt on that is yet another example of ABC journalism leading to great results. Gaven is going to speak to you for about 20 minutes or so. He's more than happy to take your questions. There is lots to speak about, of course. The ABC has lots of balls in the air at the moment in terms of what we do as journalists, and of course the funding question as well. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gaven Morris.
He's taller than me. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for all of you for coming along today. I think I've been to a Melbourne Press Club lunch as a speaker now. I think this is my third year in a row, Mark, so thank you very much for inviting me, and Michael for the Melbourne Press Club in having me along. I really enjoy these occasions, and both the opportunity to talk to all of you, but also, as Michael suggested later on, to take a few questions and to talk about our industry at a bigger picture level. I also want to acknowledge Kate Tawney, my predecessor, who is here with us today. Kate's very special to everybody at ABC News, now the CEO of the State Library of Victoria, and really thrilled to see you here today, Kate. And if I may say so, maybe one or two of my successors are here as well. Rebecca Matthews is here, Georgia Spokes, Kelly Mayo, Erin Vincent, Virginia Trioli. Think about that, people. Wouldn't that be interesting? But really glad to see everybody here. Thank you for coming. Look, today I want to talk about public interest journalism, something very close to our hearts at the ABC. And I do realise that in the age of sort of Netflix blockbusters and Amazon Echo and virtual reality, it might sound a little dry, but I wanted to start with a little bit of multimedia to get us going. So we'll just spend a moment, take a look at this quick video, and then I'll be back with you straight after that. Public interest journalism, it matters to us more than it ever has. And I think, the theme of my discussion with you all today is I think it matters to all Australians more than it ever has. As the person who currently has the privilege of being in this role, the director of ABC's News, Analysis and Investigations, it's always humbling and inspiring to be reminded like that of the inspiring role we play, but that all of our people on the ABC News teams around Australia and around the world play. We've been doing this for 85 years, and I often think when I hear that 7:45 radio news theme, the majestic fanfare come through the airwaves, or when I see that slowly rotating 4 pop up at 8:30 on a Monday night on the television, I very much feel that sense of responsibility and pride that we have as a team in carrying forward the legacy of so many amazing storytellers across the history of journalism in this country. Good journalism is a part of life in this country. It's a crucial element, it's a crucial set of fibres in the fabric of how our democracy works. And sometimes we take that for granted. We should never take it for granted, but sometimes we do. Good journalism tells us about the important events, the big issues, the national debates. It holds policymakers to account. It tells our stories, it unearths secrets, it explains, it analyses and contextualises. it changes our country when it's done well. I often say to younger journalists at the ABC, don't just aspire to cover stories, uncover them. I think that is at the heart of all journalists, to find something out that people sometimes don't want other people to know about, and to take that to the public in the public's interest. And that really is the essence of how we increasingly try to operate these days, built on the legacy how we've always tried to operate over 85 years. Nothing is more profound than breaking a great story that has an impact on people's lives. I'm going to go back to the theme Michael picked up on, and Lou, I don't mean to sort of put you on the spot again, but that story on Monday night on Four Corners, that's profound storytelling. It's personal storytelling about somebody's life that genuinely changes a conversation and often changes policy in this country. I mean, Saxon's story, if you haven't seen it, that traumatic night that 18-year-old suffered by finding herself in a back alley and without her consent, being subject to, sexual assault, and then to have to go through a justice system that then in the end, didn't recognise what she had been through in the eyes of the law. It was presented, through Lou's story across all of our platforms. That's how we do it these days. So certainly for television audiences on Monday night, it was an important event. But we now tell that story across our digital platforms, in our news programs, on our bulletins across the day. We want to make sure that when you're doing a story of that impact and of that importance, everybody, no matter how they choose to get their news and information, can have access to it. As a direct result of Lou's story and the Four Corners team putting that story to the public at the beginning of the week, the next day the New South Wales Attorney-General obviously referred the state's sexual consent laws to the Law Reform Commission, and it will now consider whether those laws meet community standards. It's journalism that changes policy, hopefully, in this case. This is what we mean by distinctive journalism. It's what we mean by impactful journalism. We talk about it a lot. We want to do much more of this. This journalism in the public interest, not just on our national shows, but in our state and territory newsrooms, among our regional teams, in our suburban offices, in our international bureaus, on TV, on radio, online and on mobile. This is what the ABC is here to do on behalf of all Australians. On Tuesday night, the federal government announced what amounts to a deep cut to the ABC's budget in the form of a 3-year freeze to the annual indexation of our operational funding. Taking effect from July 1 next year, it effectively cuts $84 million out of the ABC over 3 years, in order, said the Treasurer, to ensure the ABC continues to find back office efficiencies. That's on top of, cumulatively over the past several years, about $254 million in efficiency savings and cuts to ABC services. The majority of that $254 million we've already returned to taxpayers, and in some cases we've lost important services like the Australia Network that used to be a voice for this country out into the broader region. More than 90%, others might disagree with me on this, but I suppose one of the things I came here to say today is when we honestly look at the way we operate at the ABC, we are efficient. We're as efficient as we've ever been. 90% of the ABC's budget is now spent on creating content or delivering it to audiences. In ABC News, almost 96% of our annual budget of about $200 million is spent on journalism and production. 96%. Make no mistake, there is no more fat to cut at the ABC. Any more cuts to the ABC cut into the muscle of the organisation. Each year, the ABC receives $1 billion overall, and it is a lot of money. It's a lot of money that the taxpayers invest in what I consider an essential service back to them. Since the mid-1980s, however, the funding has declined by 28% in real terms, while over the same period, we've increased the number of services on which we serve Australians. We created ABC News 24 and iView, for instance, out of internal efficiencies, no extra funding to create services that now have a mainstream place in the way Australians consume the media. In the past 5 years alone, our public funding has declined by more than $200 million per annum. Our per capita funding for public broadcasting in Australia is 34% lower than the average in comparable democracies to ours, including the UK. In fact, the ABC serves a population 1/3 of the size of the UK, and yet we have 1/8 of the budget of the BBC. We're the most minutely scrutinised media organisation in Australia, and every dollar we spend must be accounted for. I believe this passionately, that every taxpayer who puts their hand in their pocket to give us their tax dollars needs to see value back at them for the money that they invest. It's absolutely as it should be. We are owned and we are funded by every single Australian. We're accountable to them in a way no other media in Australia is. We have, by a long way, the highest and most rigorously policed and enforced standards of quality of any media organisation in the country, as we should. An essential but often overlooked element in being trustworthy is a willingness to be honest and transparent when we get something wrong. When we make missteps or we fall short of our own standards, we acknowledge it, we act quickly and candidly, we set the record straight, and we work out how we could have done things differently. We get better because that's what Australians expect of us. We aren't faultless, we will make mistakes, but where we do, we need to own up to them and we need to tell the public we'll do better next time. The vast majority of the time, though, we get it right. And we stand proudly behind our journalism, and our journalism speaks for what we stand for. So let's take a look at some of that journalism in the past few years, reported by just one of our teams, Four Corners. Obviously, it's the most celebrated journalism team at the ABC, probably deservedly in the country. So just in those past few years, Four Corners has directly led to a royal commission into the protection and detention of children in the Northern Territory, an inquiry into the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, a Treasury investigation into the Australian Tax Office, multiple inquiries into convenience store chain 7-Eleven and the standing down of its chief executive and board. I'm thrilled to see Adele Ferguson here today, who has played no small part in many of these stories. An ASIC investigation into the Commonwealth Bank insurance arm, ComInsure. There we go again. A ban on live exports to Indonesia and an inquiry into the live cattle export trade. A special commission of inquiry into the greyhound racing industry, which initially led to a greyhound racing ban in New South Wales and its subsequent ban in the ACT. Urgent inquiries into waste management business across the country and the exploitation of aged care residents. And more. One program, last couple of years, public interest journalism. While other media do less and less of this type of reporting, we will do more at the ABC. Last October, I announced the formation of ABC Investigations. With 10 investigative reporters, plus producers and researchers, it's Australia's largest team dedicated to unearthing original stories and doing investigations in the daily news cycle. It sits alongside Four Corners and Background Briefing and 7:30 and Foreign Correspondent and PM and AM and the other brands that we already have doing great journalism. But we wanted to have more impact in the investigative journalism space day to day across our platforms. One of the first stories that team broke were the allegations of sexual assault against actor Craig McLachlan. Us telling our own version of the implications of the Me Too story in Australia. Last month, the team launched the Aged Care investigation. You'll hear a lot more about this in the months ahead. It's a public collaboration journalism project to expose potential patterns of abuse of our vulnerable elderly people and to shine a light on the scale of failures in the aged care system. Now get this, we did a call out for people to come to us to help us tell this story. By the next morning after the call out, we'd received more than 2,000 responses from people across Australia. Currently, we have well over 4,000 reports from different people in different parts of our country with a story to tell about what's not right with our aged care system. Our team is sifting through them. I don't think we quite expected it to be the body of work that it's turned out to be. The stories that we're hearing are from workers in the industry. They're from victims. They're from family members. They're from researchers and people who are experts in the field. People are sending in videos. They're sending in very personal stories. Stand by for our reporting on this topic. And I kind of have to wonder about this one. Is this the next Royal Commission or inquiry that we'll be putting on a list of ABC, public interest journalism success? In the process of doing this public collaborative journalism project, we're learning a lot about how we can work better with the public to tell stories that they're often at the coalface of experiencing. With all the tools and the technology we now have available to us, never before has the public been able to be involved in our storytelling in the way they can now. Don't tell the journalists in the newsroom this, but many people out there know more about the topics that we report on than the journalists do. So if we can tap into that expertise, if we can reach out to people in the community who have real lived experience of the stories that we want to seek to report, how amazing would that be? It's work that will change people's lives. It will change our country if we do it well. And it's a natural continuation of public interest journalism that we've been doing for 85 years. Our current strategy prioritises quality, in-depth reporting and deeper analysis from all of our journalists and our content makers every day. This is our focus. This is where we want to, if we're not doing that today, where we want to move towards. So whether you're Mark Willisey on the ABC Investigations team in Brisbane reporting a story for 7:30, or if you're Sabra Lane doing an interview on AM, if you're a journalist based in Mildura or Lisa Miller in London, if you are a photographer like Jane Cowan in the Melbourne newsroom, this is the sort of impactful original journalism we want to be representing. Increasingly, what we're seeking to do is to free people up from the daily grind of reporting the stories that they can see in front of them, the ones that everybody else are reporting, the ones that you can get from any media source. We want to do less of that. What we want to do is try to give people on our teams more time to engage with the public, to seek out those original stories, to do those investigations, to dig a little deeper, to explain a little more. And I don't think we're only doing this because it's exactly what we're here to do on behalf of the public. I also think it's great for our audiences. The more original journalism they do, the stronger our brand of journalism, the bigger our audiences will be. I have no doubt about that. Last October, I announced the creation of the specialist reporting team that sits alongside ABC Investigations. This is led by Lisa Whitby, who's the former EP of Lateline. This is a team of journalists, producers, researchers, focusing on key issues and areas that we want to do better reporting on. Things like technology and science, regional communities, consumer affairs, education, health, arts, culture and entertainment, social affairs and Indigenous. Having expertise in newsrooms, having people work a beat is important to the way journalism works. So we're returning more value to that style of journalism. In February, our national health reporter, Sophie Scott, one of the great health reporters this country has seen, told the heartbreaking story on 7:30 and across our platforms of Mackenzie Casella. If you saw this story, you'll remember it. Mackenzie was born with the fatal genetic condition spinal muscular atrophy, and she died 6 months ago at 7 months of age. Her parents told her family's story because they wanted to campaign for genetic testing for SMA to be made freely available to families. It was inaccessible to families like them. Would have made a completely different outcome in many cases of babies that are potentially a victim of SMA. Health Minister Greg Hunt met the Casellas in March and was moved by their story. On Tuesday night, as part of the budget announcements, the federal government allocated $500 million to the Australian Genomics Health Futures Mission. The first project of that investment will be Mackenzie's mission, a $20 million fund being provided for preconception screening trial for rare and debilitating birth disorders like SMA. We formed a newly, we brought together a new audio current affairs team. We used to have audio current affairs resources spread across different parts of the ABC, and last year we brought them all together in a new audio current affairs team led by Tanya Nolan. So AM, PM, The World Today, RN Breakfast, RN Drive, and the amazing background briefing. There's an investigative journalism program that punches above its weight. Our digital offerings, such as Signal, which you saw in that video there before, which is a kind of new news offering, an on-demand audio current affairs experience that's a collaboration with News Radio. And again, it's one of my favourite daily habits already, listening to Signal in the morning. You know, very conversational, very accessible, but the journalism is no less valid than anything we've done in a more traditional program. We've relaunched the ABC News channel lineup this year, including analysis programs, Matter of Fact with Stan Grant, and National Wrap with Patricia Karvelis on a Sunday night. We've set up a specialist digital team in the Canberra Parliament House Bureau to report policy as well as politics, because that's important, I think, to Australians understanding a complex world around them. Louise Yaxley in our Canberra Bureau leads that team, and it includes now a dedicated political vertical and soon other ways of getting great policy and politics reporting out to a much bigger audience. I've mentioned our public collaboration journalism project, just one of the initiatives that is being spearheaded by a new role we started last year, the News Content Development and Innovation role. Erin Vincent is in that role, one of our incredible emerging leaders at ABC News. And the very nature of that role is to find audiences we currently don't have and to work out what content might work for those audiences and how we can deliver it to them. Another focus this year is 7:30. If any of you have seen 7:30 this year, you'll see that it is being reinvigorated day by day. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that last month we lifted the geo-block on the ABC News channel, so for the first time the best of our reporting across the news channel can now be seen by audiences all around the world. Took us a long time to get there. There were many frustrating moments along the way where the geo-block went up and the geo-block came down, and both Australians and international viewers overseas would get very frustrated. Well, it's now off for good, and anybody anywhere in the world can watch the news channel. The next step for us is to ensure that the value we bring to all of those things is reflected in the journalism we do in our state and territory newsrooms. Last week we outlined the Local Journalism Initiative. This is led by Rebecca Matthews, who's here with us today, and it's an incredible piece of work that literally for the first time in a generation looked at what we were doing in state and territory newsrooms and asked the question, is it fit for purpose for contemporary audiences? The newsrooms really haven't been reshaped for decades. And while our teams have worked really hard to change the way they do their journalism, to adjust to changing audience habits, we were still structured and led by many things that were broadcast focused. We want those newsrooms to be led and structured to meet the lifestyles of Australians today, but much more important than that, we want our journalists in those newsrooms to have the time, the resources and the ability to do a stronger, bolder brand of journalism for state and territory audiences. We do anticipate that as we work through this process, there'll be about 20 redundancies out of the Local Journalism Initiative. And obviously, as managers at the ABC, it's never nice to be working through any sort of plan where people are going to be leaving us. But the aim here really is to bring in new senior roles into those newsrooms who are skilled and equipped for the audience's challenges that are in front of us. There are no fewer roles in our state and territory newsrooms as a result of these changes, and no less money and resources available to our state. So there's not a budget cut, we're not saving any money by doing this. Some local newsrooms like Darwin, when we've looked at what they have to be able to do their jobs, need more resource. So we'll be investing more journalists in places that need a little more. And most of our newsrooms will get more resources to be able to cover stories either by travelling or putting more resources on them or whatever else. So it really is an investment in the journalism and an investment in being able to take that journalism to new audiences. We've had this conversation with journalists in our local newsroom for a few years now. We want them to do fewer stories. We're upfront about that. They tell us we're stretched. We've been pulled across all these platforms. Our resources aren't growing, and yet we feel like we're often too busy to do a good job of the stories that we're assigned. We agree with them. So we're asking them to do fewer stories. And I put it like this in some of our newsrooms. If you could do, a small number fewer stories each day, but put those resources into the stories that we think are the most important, the quality of those stories will go up. So fewer stories done in more depth, in more detail is what we're aiming to achieve. Now, at this point, with all of those initiatives and all of that new activity, you're probably wondering, where does all the money come from for that? Not a single extra dollar to ABC News over the course of these initiatives. This is all as a result of us restructuring what we already had within the budget and the resources that we've got. We're working more efficiently, using our resources better, as taxpayers would expect us to do. As I mentioned at the start, the team in ABC News is lean, with only 4% of overall budget going to back office management and overheads. In 1987, your ABC, as you all recall, famously cost 8 cents a day. In 1987 dollar terms, we now cost each Australian 4 cents a day. In other words, since the 1980s, our per capita funding has halved in real terms. When you consider all the new services we put on across that time, we're getting a lot more value out of the dollars Australians give us. We must be as efficient and well organised as possible in order to invest as much as possible in content, because that's how we fulfil our bargain with all Australians. In this era of truthiness, of false information, of fake news, of media outlets which only tell us what we want to believe, and social media echo chambers, there is a great and growing need for strong, impartial news providers that cut to the chase and tell you the truth. As the national broadcaster, we have a unique and increasingly important role to play as Australia's independent source of information to people. In concrete terms, it means in allocating our resources, if we want to start doing something new, or we want to reach a different audience, or we want to change the content mix that we want to offer people, we have to stop doing something else, or we have to significantly change something we're already doing. That can mean tough decisions. If we want to give state and territory audiences, a high-quality journalism across more platforms, because that's what audiences are seeking from us, and that's what we're seeing in audience trends, then we've got to look at the way we produce radio news and television news, which we know over time, whether we like it or not, audiences are slowly declining from. Last year, we discontinued Lateline. Once an incredible journalism and current affairs brand in this country. It suffered from changing audience habits. Simply, people weren't watching late-night television for news and information nearly as much as they once did. But we shifted those resources, many of them, into ABC Investigations and the Specialist Reporting Team, which I spoke of earlier. These are multi-platform teams upholding exactly the type of journalism that Lateline embodied in its prime. We've shortened the format of The World Today and PM, and people aren't happy about it. We've made them the same duration as the flagship radio current affairs program AM in the morning. But what we've done with the proceeds of being able to do that is to create new, distinctive, original, on-demand podcast experiences, and made sure that we're able to reach people outside of those hours on scheduled AM broadcasts that we had seen with slowly declining audiences over time. The change also created space in the schedule for our colleagues in regional and local to launch a new half-hour regional radio current affairs program, Australia-wide. And our weekly current affairs teams on television are now looking at the way they can work more closely together to achieve a better use of resources to put more of our content out to digital audiences. Over the past 2 years, ABC News audiences on web and mobile platforms have grown significantly. We now reach almost 5 million Australians every month. The smartphone audience has increased almost 30% over that time. And 2/3 of that audience is under 40. Now, these are audiences, when I was a young journalist at the ABC, we were always told we're never going to be interested in what the ABC had to offer. And yet now, our digital and mobile audiences are dominated by people under 40 reading the same stories, experiencing the same journalism that once we only preserved for older broadcast audiences. The median age of a TV news consumer is now over 60. The median age. Audiences who rarely watched or listened to our broadcast programs are now experiencing our journalism on emerging platforms. We're reaching a lot of new audiences on third-party platforms, on Apple News, on Facebook Messenger, on YouTube. None of this is to talk down our broadcast offering. It's still crucial to what we do. We still have big audiences tuning into our scheduled broadcasts, and long may they stay. God willing, we might grow them. But certainly in only catering to scheduled broadcast audiences, we're not being relevant to all Australians. So we're often asked, well, how long will the ABC continue to produce programs and bulletins on linear broadcast platforms? And I say to our people, well, for as long as we can make them good, people will still tune in. I think we'll be doing it long after many others choose not to, because we've got a public responsibility to be producing great programs and getting them on all platforms. So while we might be growing our audience on digital, there is still a very loyal audience watching and listening on radio and television. We want to serve everybody. The BBC Director General, Tony Hall, has described this as riding two horses. And I think that sort of gets you there, but it often feels like riding two horses that are galloping at 100 miles an hour. And clearly, the government anytime soon isn't planning to double our funding. So we've got to be able to manage how we do this well. Every dollar must be divided between services to linear and digital audiences, and every dollar must work hard. But the most important thing is that we do the journalism in the first place, because it doesn't matter how many platforms we're on, if we don't have great stories to tell, what's the point? As I told the news teams yesterday after the budget announcements, Australians trust the ABC more than they trust any other media, and certainly more than they trust any politician. 70% of Australians watch, read, or listen to the ABC every week, and 80% say the ABC is their trusted source of news and information. Australian stories, they also turn to us for Australian stories told through drama and comedy and entertainment. They turn to us for safe and ad-free children's content, Australian music and culture, and the discussion of ideas. Trust is a key word for us. Who can you trust? We trusted Facebook with our personal lives. Then we found out they were selling it to Cambridge Analytica, who used it to influence the US election. We trusted AMP with our finances and our financial security. And a few weeks into the Banking Royal Commission, its chair and chief executive are departing. We want to trust our governments, our churches, our employers. We want to trust those who care for us when we're vulnerable. We want to trust the security services that protect us. So often in recent times, the public's faith in these things has been shaken. When this happens, there's often a tendency to shoot the messenger. Political and powerful interests seek to chip away at the public's confidence and in the credibility of the independent media, to try and undermine the trust that we share with Australians. But people see through this. The wisdom of the public is pretty profound, in my view. They recognise the public interest because it's their interest. I'm here to tell you today that the ABC's relationship with the Australian people is healthy and sound. The budget measures outlined this week would not take effect until July 1 next year. The ABC is, in fact, at the moment, still preparing a triennial funding submission that we'll put to government for consideration, before next year's budget. While this week's announcements, to some extent, preempt that discussion, we will continue to put our case forward. We'll continue to show the value in the services that we provide all Australians, and we think that's a pretty compelling argument and conversation to have. We, above and beyond all else, will stand by the sort of journalism you saw on Monday night. We want to do that sort of journalism every day, for all audiences on any platform. Journalism with the power to change the nation for the better. The best way to make our case, to maintain our absolute commitment to Australians to provide the most valuable, in-depth and investigative storytelling, accurate analysis and context, and reliable breaking news coverage. When we spoke to staff yesterday, worried about whether a budget cut may affect their jobs, may affect their futures, I said to them, go back to your desks, get back on your computers, pick up your phones, and do a better job of journalism tomorrow, because that, more than anything, will show the value to of Australians of what we do, and will do more to defend our future than anything else. We want to make sure that that journalism is available to everyone across all of our programs, platforms and channels, to show Australians the value we provide them every day. In short, to stand behind the principles of independent journalism and to stand up for them in the public's interest, as we always have. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Morris. Richard Ferguson from The Australian.
Hi,
Thank
Richard.
you very much for your speech, sir. On the topic of the Communications Minister's statement, how did you end up saying that 43 million in news gathering funding would be discontinued when the Minister says that that's false and it doesn't appear in the budget papers? And have you spoken to the Minister since then?
Richard, I'm not, you'll understand, directly involved in conversations with governments over funding. I try to steer a news team towards doing good journalism. So we have other people at the ABC who take care of that for us. Look, so I can't fully explain to you what was or wasn't said. What I do know is that our people who were in those conversations were left with a very clear impression that that news funding wouldn't be discontinued. Now, if that's not the case, and the government is open to a conversation about continuing that funding, we are ready to go. We're happy to sort of point out the value that that funding currently provides to audiences. And if in the end that funding can be continued, we'll spend it wisely and we'll do a good job with it. But I can't fully explain the discrepancy between the accounts of what was and wasn't said.
Peter Bartlett. A comment first, Gavin, and then a question. The comment, I think it's a long time since we've heard a media spokesman being so positive, and it's wonderful to hear about the great stories and the great reporters and staff that the ABC has. In the print context, I think from a media lawyer's point of view, we sometimes hear that the media is sued, and there are some of those cases that the masthead would be badly damaged if there's a loss. And the observation is that I think the budget of the ABC has squeezed the legal department too much. I think that they're under-resourced and overworked. And I think that the great reporters on Four Corners and 7:30 Report, etc., are exposed in the future if that isn't rectified. That's the comment from a biased point of view. But then the question is, the ABC and SBS, what's the argument for amalgamation? What's the argument against? And do you think it'll ever happen?
Look, let me, Peter, comment on the issue around, the resourcing for our legal teams, because, I know this isn't necessarily always a popular conversation to have when we get $1 billion a year from taxpayers. And I know many people think, surely within $1 billion there's efficiencies to be gained and resources to be trimmed and fat to be taken away. I don't think, I agree with you at just how stretched our legal department is, but I look at our people department and I look at our news department, and I look at what we're trying to do in terms of creating distinctive Australian drama. I look at what we're seeking to do in maintaining regional services to audiences. And I think certainly the impression that you'll get from many people inside the ABC is all of those things feel stretched and overburdened. Now, maybe in the end, if public broadcasting is a diminishing return for governments, we have to look at the structure of that overall. And I suppose that goes to your SBS question. Look, I personally don't have a view on whether in this day and age kind of two public broadcasters is a good idea or not. I think that SBS and the ABC are increasingly trying to find areas where we can work together. I think we can, we've had a number of conversations in recent years around where there are things that we can do jointly that don't diminish the audience proposition of what we're trying to do, but absolutely make the best use of public money. I do think in the end it's a decision that is a political one, and a government at some point will have to decide whether it thinks that two public broadcasters is the right approach or the wrong one. And until that point, our job is to continue to be provided with the resource that the taxpayers grant us and to do our best job with it.
Yeah, question here.
Gaven, Brodie Carmody from The Age. Thanks for your speech.
Hi, Brodie.
I really wanted you to perhaps explain what actually is at risk here with that $80 million cut that you were talking about in your speech, because it's sort of a figure that, you know, over 3 years, it's comparable to what commercial media companies have had to face. So yeah, what's at risk here with that cut?
I not for a second, Brodie, do I think that the ABC is in a special place on this. We all see what our colleagues at commercial operators have been going through in recent years as well. And, by no means do I think that a set of diminishing returns around all of our media in Australia is a great outcome for audiences or, let's be honest, for our democracy. I wish Fairfax was as strong a media organisation as it could possibly be. We wish News Limited and Sky News and Channel 7 and Channel 10 all the very best in making a success of the commercial businesses that they're in so that they can support great journalism. But at the ABC, we do have a different mandate and a different mission, and that is to be, first and foremost, accountable to the public. And the way I think about it is we have been just as rigorous in recent years in trimming back our activity, certainly looking at where there are efficiencies and reductions in management and reductions in back office functions to return value to our shareholders, the taxpayers of Australia. So I hope it's not a contest that, if everybody's losing money, so must the public broadcaster. I hope in the end what we're talking about here is saying what are the essential services in the commercial media or in the public sector media that are important for our democracy to work properly, and that all of us are protecting those. Because, I am optimistic overwhelmingly about the future of our ability as media organisations to reach audiences, but I also do worry about at what point many of those services, find it really difficult to do their job.
Questions, please raise your hand. You've got one down the back there.
David Forster, a retired lawyer and student of journalism at RMIT.
I'm ready, David.
Thank you. You said that newsrooms haven't been reshaped for decades. On the issue of fake news, can we expect any changes in approaches adopted by the ABC if Turnbull and Shorten at the next election, or their minders or their followers put out some fake news stories? For example, as we know, in America, I think Mr. Trump is up to 3,000 fake news stories of his own. How are you going to address the issue of fake news in the next election cycle?
Good question. I mean, look, I promise you, when we get out of bed in the morning, all of our journalists, first and foremost at the ABC, seek the truth. The truth matters more than it's ever mattered because there's a proliferation of so many sources of information, and trying to work out the ones you can trust and the ones you don't know whether you can trust is becoming more and more difficult for people. We've never had more information available to us, and we've never had more bad information available to us. So certainly core to our mission at the ABC is to seek the truth. And I promise you, as we go into the next election campaign or in any other period, testing the claims of our politicians, making sure that their sums add up, making sure that their promises are kept, that's part of our role. They don't like us doing it sometimes, but that's okay because we're not doing it for them, we're doing it for the public. So that's the way we see our role sort of in the political cycle. And I think I see great opportunity for journalists in this era because if you want to tell the truth, I mean, I've often said you look at the digital marketplace, more and more digital news operators coming into that marketplace, many of them seeking to swim in the shallow end of the pool. I've always said to our people, stay down the deep end, you'll be fine, because that's going to be more valuable to people the more confusing and complex the world gets. And at the heart of that proposition is truth, and that's what we have to seek when we get out of bed each day.
Lou. Louise Milligan, she doesn't take any prisoners,
All right,
Gaven,
okay.
so over to you.
No.
You've been warned.
It's actually a comment, not a question, but just for Brodie, I've worked in commercial media at Channel 7 and at News Corp for The Australian, and in a lot of other workplaces when I was a student, and the ABC is the first place I've ever worked in where they don't provide tea bags or milk. So anyone thinking that we're swanning around living off the fat of the land, it has rocks in their heads.
We use all the tea bags at news breakfast before you get in, Lou. That's why they're from Aldi, though, so that's all right. Yes, over here.
Hi, Georgie Moore from Australian Associated Press.
Hi, Georgia.
You earlier said that with the slated $84 million funding freeze that there was no more fat to trim so that would cut into muscle, which unfortunately implies job losses. So how many jobs are potentially at risk from this freeze?
It's fair to say, certainly to us in operational areas, that the announcement on Tuesday night was something of a surprise. So grant us a little time to sort of work through the issues of what a cut like that might mean over 3 years, bearing in mind that it wouldn't start until the middle of 2019, that budget year that starts 2019-2020. But what I know from reality is $84 million over 3 years, there is simply no way that we can achieve that without looking at content creation and certainly looking at jobs within the organisation. Now, as I say, for many people cutting from outside the ABC, the idea of cutting jobs inside the ABC, is a painless proposition. But at the point where we are genuinely then reassessing services and potentially having to make decisions about what we would continue to afford and what we can't continue to afford, there are real consequences in an $84 million cut, and there's no way around it. Now, as I said, a lot can happen between now and the middle of 2019, including a conversation with the government around a triennial funding submission. So I've certainly said to all of our people so far, don't worry about this yet, don't be anxious about this yet, we have time to work this out to some extent. But should we get to the middle of next year and should we have an $84 million cut over 3 years, it will hurt.
Yes, question there.
Thank you. Gavin, Haroon Hassan from the Victorian Bar. I apologise for adding to the chorus of lawyers who seem to be questioning you today, and I'll declare an interest. I often act for the ABC. The question I had for you is, in light of the initiatives you've talked about, some of the most exciting journalism that I think has come out of the ABC has been the collaborative work you've done, and I'm particularly thinking of Fairfax, so Adele Ferguson, you singled out before, he's done a number of these, Nick McKenzie, and Peter Bartlett and I have worked on that, and I can echo Peter's comments that the ABC legal team is pretty stretched, and Craig McLaughlin is an example of how that has happened. What role do you see for that sort of collaboration? It's been done spectacularly well with Fairfax. Do you see it branching out to other outlets?
We'll go anywhere, any place, any time, with anyone who wants to collaborate on good journalism. I promise you. I mean, we're not, brandist, we're not organisationalist. If there is a job to be done for the Australian public in finding and telling good stories, we're up for it. Join us. And we'll certainly look at any model that might exist. I mean, to that point, I still think that the biggest opportunity for us in the future in relation to finding new stories and acting in the public interest is working with the public as well. And when I look at the opportunity in journalism in the years ahead, that's the thing I'm most excited about. The idea that whether you are a specialist or whether you are someone who happens to find themselves on the scene of something as it's unfolding, we can work much more closely with you to tell those stories to the broader public. I also think that just think about how complex this is going to be for all of us as media organisations in trying to stretch our resources. You know, I've talked a little bit in the ABC about something I've called the end of schedule. This is the point, for broadcasters at least, maybe newspapers have already sort of dealt with much of this, but for broadcasters it's the point where you get past the tipping point of the majority of your audiences making their decisions about viewing, listening, consuming news and information, all the rest of it on a clock. And that everything becomes more personalised, becomes on demand, becomes much more flexible. So the scenario that I've thought through at length around this is if I get in my car, you know, to drive home from work, or I'm hopping on the bus to get to work in the morning, and I've done that journey 15,000 times, my phone or my car is going to know exactly how that's going to go, and it's going to be tuned into Google Maps, and Google Maps will tell it how much traffic there is or whether there's a delay on the railway line. It's going to know something of my interests in the news, and it's going to know about what time of day it is. It's going to know about where I live. It's going to know how old I am. Machine learning and artificial intelligence joined up with the devices that we carry in our pockets or that will soon be on the dashboards of our cars. This will be making the decision about the sorts of news services and media services that we will get. And so my car will know that my journey home takes 21 minutes on average, but the traffic is light, so it'll be a little quicker. And it'll know that it's, you know, 17 minutes past 6 in the evening, and then I'm not going to wait to the top of the next hour to listen to the news. And it'll know that I kind of love sport, but not very keen on, you know, stories about pets. And it will deliver me something tailored to those needs. This is the media environment that we will all be entering into. It doesn't make the journalism less important, it makes it more important, in my view, but it does make the ability for all of us as media organisations to look at ways we can work together around the provision of services, because some of us have expertise in video, and some of us have expertise in audio, and some of us write great stories, and some of us do great investigative journalism, and some of us cover sport better than others. And I think you'll get to a point where increasingly we are looking at ways where we can complement each other, knowing that as editors and as media organisations, we so won't be making all the decisions.
We've got time for maybe one final question, and the lucky winner is over here. Yes.
Hello. I don't really think I have any special interests at this point, but so my name is William, and I was going to ask, being the ABC and being publicly funded, I would imagine that means you're probably able to take some more risks than commercial stations with deciding what you can do, because you're not responsible to shareholders in making a profit. And so do you think that there's ever a point where there's a threat that you might be taking less risks because of funding cuts and deciding that we should play it safe? Maybe, like, instead of saying, let's get rid of Lateline and let's try something new, instead of going, well, this seems to be working well, let's just keep it, it's okay as it is. How do you deal with the temptation to play it safe instead of taking more adventurous approaches?
See, the best questions always come from the school kids.
That's a sensational question. Where do I start with that? You are right on one level that we are able to take more risks around some things in relation to innovation and experimenting with types of content, in relation to not upsetting any of our sponsors, or worrying about what advertisers or commercial interests of our company might think. Absolutely right on that. So we can take more risks in those areas. On the other hand, we can't take too many risks that we step over the line in terms of our editorial integrity, in terms of the quality of our services, in terms of making mistakes. I mean, I'm not telling you any secrets to know that, in the past 12 months we've had one or two stories that has caused us a lot of, reputational angst, because we haven't quite got them right. We take that really to heart. We take that very seriously, and those sorts of risks we cannot take. Now, how do you put all of that together to create an environment where people feel like they can be brave and people feel like they're independently choosing and reporting stories on behalf of the public, not behalf of any other interest? I mean, we take our independence at the ABC very seriously. It is the most precious thing, really, that we have the privilege of over any other media organisation, which is not to say that other media organisations aren't brave editorially and don't do great journalism. But that independence that we're granted by taxpayers is so precious. What I would say to our people, and I do say to this, if you've upset a content and if you've upset a company and your journalism is above reproach, then you've done it for good reasons. If a politician is mad with you because you've done a story and you've touched a nerve, most of the time, that's because we've told a story that was worth telling. Don't be afraid of the pressure that will often come to bear on you, even though sometimes people can see that or perceive that or interpret that as then manifesting itself in a budget cut or reduction in resources or any of those sorts of things. So it is a brilliant question. It's an incredible dilemma that we deal with every day in our newsrooms, taking risks on behalf of the audience while not stepping beyond the boundaries of our standards, knowing that we can be independent while at the same time responsible. You've exactly summed up and analysed the dilemma of journalism at the ABC.
Fantastic question, thank you. Listen, that's about all we've got time for. I'll toss one more in. You've mentioned this fantastic suite of ABC News and current affairs programs. What's your favourite program?
I love our digital service because you get the best of all of it
very
in a
different.
way that suits your lifestyle is the way I would put it.
Yes, you can run for politics one day. Gaven, thank you very much for speaking to us. You've been here for 3 years now in a row. We look forward to welcoming you back next year, unless by that stage it's Erin or Rebecca or Georgia or Kelly.
Or Virginia.
Or Virginia. Nobody wants that. And I say that with love. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next Melbourne Press Club function. Thank you, Gaven Morris.